This is my fourth video over my series over the brief history of Russia. This time I'm going to be talking about the Russian Empire from 1721 to 1914, with its first establishment under Peter the Great, and technically lasts until 1917, but that will be in a separate video about the impact and events of World War I on Russia as a whole. Under Peter the Great, who would eventually form the Russian Empire in 1721, he would actually begin to establish it after his victory in the Great Northern War against Sweden in 1721. He led many other reforms that would impact the Russian Empire, such as modernizing the army and navy for the time period, as well as overhauling the government into a more Western-minded system, although he did keep his very autocratic and despotic powers. Next up was Catherine the Great in 1762 to 96. She was called an enlightened despot, who was a monarchist leader who retained full power by using the Enlightenment, which means that they used the ideas of giving more power to the people, but as a means of progressing their own power to keep them liking the monarchy as a result. She would rapidly expand the Russian Empire. For example, she would secure Crimea from the Ottoman Empire. She would secure western parts of Ukraine, a lot of Eastern Europe, and more. As a result, she was essentially the founder of a true Eastern Empire of Russia, as even though Peter the Great would establish the Russian Empire itself, she was the one who made it into the Eastern European hegemony that it was known for at the time period. Next up is about Napoleon and Crimea leading up into this 1914 period. Napoleon was eventually defeated after his disastrous invasion of Russia, which is a very infamous event. In the following Congress of Vienna from 1814 to 1815, they would redraw much of the actual borders of Europe. On this map it's very hard to see, but for example, all Polish gains over here were consolidated as Russia originally held these lands, and a lot of things were redrawn, but for Russia's sake, it's very important to recognize that they gained a lot of Polish territory, which was their primary goal in this war, as well as securing the Holy Alliance with Prussia and Austria. Essentially, this went along with a lot of the policies of the Congress of Vienna, and the fact that all major participating powers were monarchies, so they aimed to work together to keep down revolutions and liberal revolts together to stabilize Europe. This was an extension of that in a more direct way, where Russia, Prussia, and Austria had an alliance where they would essentially come to each other's defense in case of these uprisings, which was a lot more direct than other countries had, such as the United Kingdom of France, or the other powers in this balance of power system in Europe. Russia would overall consolidate their lands in Asia during this time period. On this map, this was their extent at around, I believe, the 1860s, but as you can see here, they've secured all of Siberia, and they've already taken land from China down here, and moving closer to Mongolia and securing Central Asia. The Great Game was the major part of this. This is just a term essentially for the British, which primarily took hold in India as well as influence in Persia, against the Russians, who secured a lot of their influence directly over Central Asia itself, as well as in Persia and other nations. But it's essentially their attempts to outdo each other in this region to gain hegemony, in which Russia gained these direct territories, and Britain gained pretty much India and these buffer states in between of Persia and Afghanistan. They would also carve their own spheres of influence in China. Important out of this time period was the Crimean War, which was initiated by Russia as a war against the Ottomans to protect Orthodox Christians within the Ottoman Empire from persecution. That was their alleged reason why. However, France and the United Kingdom would intervene quickly into this war, turning this into a European-wide war, as even though it wasn't actually waged really on much land, most famously in Crimea, which is where it gets its name from, a lot of the war's actual impacts were on the sea, with the British fighting the Russians in the ocean and essentially consolidating further British domination over the seas. This would essentially humiliate Russia. This war was terrible on all sides, essentially, but this would knock down a lot of Russia's power, especially in terms of the morale. It's important to remember at this time that Russia now is the third largest country in all of human history, only behind the British Empire in first with their different colonies, and the Mongol Empire had a similar region, but they had much more of actual Asia. That's what I want to talk about for the Russian Empire this time period. Obviously, there's a lot more things that would happen after the Crimean War. A lot of it I skipped over because they were essentially reforms or getting Russia prepared for the eventual impacts of World War I, such as their alliances with France and so forth. These are essentially just set the stage for World War I, and I'm planning to try to cover these in my next video if I can. which will be over the Russian Empire's collapse in World War I and the major events that took place.